The shuttle docked with a soft hiss, and Morgan stepped onto the orbital station called Axis Prime for the first time. The corridors stretched wide enough for creatures 3 times her size, and the air carried a strange mix of smells she could not name. Aliens of every shape moved past her without a second glance. Some walked on 2 legs like her. Others floated. A few crawled along the walls with dozens of tiny limbs. Adjusted the strap of her bag and followed the glowing path on the floor toward the registration hall. She was 22 years old, the youngest graduate in the history of Earth's United Forces Academy, and the first human ever accepted into the elite combat tactics division of the Galactic Coalition Military Academy. Back home, they called her a prodigy. Here, she was just another new face in a crowd of aliens who had been traveling between stars, while humans were still figuring out fire. The registration hall was enormous. Hundreds of cadets stood in neat rows, organized by species and division. Found her place at the end of a line, the only human in the combat division section. The cadet in front of her stood nearly 8 feet tall with skin that shifted colors like oil on water. It turned to look at her, blinked 3 sets of eyes, and turned back without a word. A booming voice silenced the hall. Looked up to see Commander stride onto the raised platform at the front. He was one of the oldest spacefaring species in the Coalition. His body was thick with muscle, and 4 powerful arms hung at his sides. His skin glowed with soft blue light that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. His face held no expression she could read, but his eyes found her across the distance, and she felt the weight of his attention. "Today you receive your weapons," Commander announced. His voice needed no amplifier. "These tools will become part of you. You will train with them, sleep beside them, and trust them with your lives. They have been selected based on your species' capabilities and your aptitude scores." The ceremony began. One by one, cadets stepped forward to receive their assignments. A reptilian cadet received a plasma rifle with a barrel longer than its arm. A floating jellyfish-like being was given a personal shield unit that wrapped around its body like a second skin. 2 cadets accepted matching energy blades that hummed with deadly light. Watched and waited. She noticed patterns in the assignments. Species with strong arms received heavy weapons. Species with quick reflexes received precision tools. Species with natural armor received offensive gear, while softer species received defensive equipment. It made sense. It was logical. Her name was called. Walked forward. The hall grew quiet. She could feel every eye on her, hundreds of alien gazes watching the human approach the commander. She kept her back straight and her face calm. Commander looked down at her. The blue glow of his skin brightened slightly. "Morgan," he said, "human, first of your kind in this division." "Yes, Commander." He reached behind himself and brought forward her weapon, stared at it. It was a stick. A plain wooden stick, roughly a meter long, smooth and simple, nothing more. Laughter rippled through the hall. Someone made a sound that might have been a snort. Heard whispers in languages she did not understand, but the tone was clear enough. "A suitable weapon," Commander said, "for a species still in its infancy." Reached out and took the stick. It was lighter than she expected. The wood was pale, almost white, with a grain that swirled in delicate patterns. She turned it over in her hands, feeling its balance, noting how it fit perfectly in her grip. She looked up at the commander. "Thank you, sir." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or curiosity. He had expected anger. He had expected protest. Gave him neither. She returned to her place in line and stood at attention while the ceremony continued. The stick rested against her shoulder like it belonged there. After the ceremony, found her quarters in the human section of the station. The room was small but clean, with a window that looked out at the stars. She set her bag on the bed and placed the stick on the desk, studying it under the light. A knock came at her door. She opened it to find Chris, a young man with messy brown hair and grease stains on his uniform. He worked in the station's engineering department, one of the few other humans assigned to Axis Prime. "I heard what happened," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His face was red with anger. "That was wrong, that was so wrong. You should file a complaint. You should demand a real weapon. They cannot treat you like that." Picked up the stick and held it toward the light. "Look at this." "I am looking at it. It is a stick." "Look closer. See the grain. See how it curves here and straightens there." Chris leaned in, frowning. "So this was not cut by a machine. Someone carved this by hand. The marks are too irregular, too personal, and the balance is perfect, exactly perfect." She spun the stick in her fingers and it moved like it was part of her hand. "Commander made this himself." Chris shook his head. "Why would he do that? He hates humans. Everyone says so." "Maybe, or maybe he wanted to see what I would do." Set the stick down and looked at her friend. "Back on Earth, my grandmother taught me Aikido. She was a master, one of the best, and her favorite weapon was the bow staff, a wooden stick about this long, used for centuries by warriors who faced enemies with swords and spears. This is not Earth. These people have laser cannons." Smiled. "Then I will have to be creative." That night, after Chris left, pushed her furniture against the walls to clear a space in the center of her room. She picked up the stick and closed her eyes, remembering her grandmother's voice, her grandmother's hands guiding her through the forms. She began to move. The stick spun and swept through the air, striking invisible opponents, blocking attacks that existed only in her memory. Her feet shifted across the floor in patterns drilled into her muscles since childhood. Strike, block, pivot, strike. The movements flowed like water, each one leading naturally into the next. The wood felt warm in her hands. The grain seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, though she told herself it was just her imagination. Outside her window, the stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere on the station, Commander was watching footage of the ceremony, studying her reaction, forming his own conclusions. Did not know what test she was facing, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not fail. 3 weeks passed, and learned what it meant to be the weakest person in the room. Every morning, the combat division cadets gathered in the training grounds for weapons drills, stood in formation with her wooden stick while the others practiced with plasma rifles, energy blades, and shield generators. The instructors never called on her. The other cadets never looked at her. She had become invisible, a joke that had stopped being funny. But was not wasting her time. While the others fired at targets, she studied them. She counted the seconds between shots, noting how long each weapon took to recharge. She watched the way different species held their guns, learning their blind spots and weak angles. She memorized the glow patterns that appeared before an energy blade reached full power, giving her a window of nearly 2 seconds to react. At night, she visited the station's tactical archives. The librarian, a small furry creature with 6 arms, seemed amused that a human wanted to read military history, but he gave her access without question and spent hours learning how every species in the coalition fought. They relied on overwhelming strength. They trusted their crystalline bodies to absorb damage while they pressed forward. They used cybernetic enhancements to predict enemy movements. Every species had a pattern. Every pattern had a weakness. The simulation chambers were where cadets proved themselves. Instructor, with metal plates covering half his face, ran the exercises with cold efficiency. His cybernetic eye could track 20 targets at once, and his voice never rose above a flat monotone. "Squad 7, he announced one morning. "Urban pacification scenario. Defend the marked position against automated hostiles. Begin." Was assigned to Squad 7. Her teammates were a 2 and a serpentine creature whose name she could not pronounce. None of them acknowledged her as they took their positions. The simulation started. Enemy drones poured through the streets of the fake city, weapons blazing with non-lethal stun bolts. Squad opened fire, their plasma rifles lighting up the shadows. She crouched behind cover, stick in hand, watching the battle unfold. Within minutes, it fell apart. The pushed too far forward and got flanked. The tried to absorb fire from 3 directions and their shields overloaded. The serpent retreated towards position, saw her, and changed direction, slithering toward a different exit. They left her alone. Did not panic. She had expected this. She moved deeper into the ruined building, using her stick to test the floor for weak spots. Sensor drones swept through the corridors, searching for survivors. She pressed herself into the shadows and let them pass. For 47 minutes, survived alone. She used broken pipes to create noise in empty rooms, drawing drones away from her position. She wedged her stick into door mechanisms, jamming them shut behind her. When a combat drone cornered her in a dead-end hallway, she threw a chunk of rubble to trigger its targeting system, then rolled beneath its firing arc while it tracked the false target. Her stick found the power coupling on its back, and the drone went dark. When the simulation ended, walked out of the chamber covered in dust but unharmed. Her squad stood waiting, their expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Instructor reviewed the footage in silence, his cybernetic eye whirred as it processed the data. He said nothing too, but she noticed him save her performance file to a separate folder. That night trained alone in an empty cargo bay. The space was large enough for her to move freely, and no one came here after hours. She practiced forms until her arms ached, then practiced more. A voice interrupted her. "Why do you bother?" Spun around, stick raised. Stood in the doorway, crystalline features glittering in the dim light. The cadet had been one of the ones who laughed loudest at the weapon ceremony. Now their expression was unreadable. "Why do I bother with what?" asked. "Training, fighting, any of this." Stepped closer, arms folded across their chest. "You have no real weapon, you have no natural armor. You cannot enhance your body with technology like the. You are soft and slow and fragile. Why have you not requested a transfer? Why have you not filed a complaint?" Lowered her stick. "Would a complaint give me a plasma rifle?" "No, Commander would never allow it." "Then what would be the point?" Tilted their head. The point would be dignity. The point would be refusing to accept humiliation. Smiled. It was not a happy smile. "You think this is humiliation, carrying a stick instead of a gun, being ignored by my squad, being laughed at by strangers." She held up the wooden weapon, turning it so the light caught the grain. "My ancestors carried sticks like this against enemies with swords. They carried rocks against enemies with guns. They won, not always, not easily, but they won because they understood something your people never had to learn." "What is that?" "Every weapon has limits. Power cells run dry, blades break, shields fail, but this," she tapped her forehead, "this never runs out, and the stick reminds me to use it." Stared at her for a long moment. Then, without another word, they turned and left. Returned to her training. She did not notice the shadow in the corridor above, where Commander stood watching with all 4 arms clasped behind his back. The next morning, an alarm woke the entire station. Dressed quickly and joined the flood of cadets rushing toward the main briefing hall. Screens along the walls displayed tactical data and star maps. A red symbol blinked near the edge of Coalition space. Commander's voice boomed through the speakers. "All cadets report to assigned stations. An unknown hostile force has been detected approaching Coalition territory. All training exercises are suspended. You will be mobilized for live combat evaluation within 48 hours." The hall erupted in murmurs. Live combat, real enemies, real consequences. Gripped her stick and felt the wood grow warm against her palm. This was no longer a game. The transport ship descended through clouds of yellow dust and got her first look at 7. The moon was ugly. Brown rock stretched to the horizon, broken only by the rusted towers of an abandoned mining facility. Wind howled against the ship's hull, carrying sand that scratched at the windows like tiny claws. "Combat evaluation zone," the pilot announced. "All squads prepare for deployment." checked her equipment one last time. She had her stick, a small pack with water and emergency supplies, and a communication device strapped to her wrist. Around her, other cadets adjusted plasma rifles and activated shield units. No one offered her a spare weapon. No one even looked at her. The squads were assigned as they landed. Found herself standing before, who had been named squad leader for this exercise. "You are with me," said, their crystalline eyes narrowing. "Rear guard position. Stay behind the group and do not get in our way." "Understood." The squad moved out. Besides them there were 4 others, 2 soldiers with heavy plasma cannons, a scout with sensor implants, and a small cadet named Ren whose scales shimmered green in the dusty light. Ren was the only one who nodded as they began their march. Their objective was simple: reach the central control hub of the mining facility and secure it before the automated defenses could lock them out. Other squads had similar missions throughout the complex. Scores would be based on speed, efficiency, and casualties. The outer sections of the facility were quiet. Rusted equipment lay scattered across the ground and the buildings groaned in the wind. Kept her eyes moving, watching for movement, listening for sounds that did not match the environment. Her stick felt solid in her grip. The scout raised a hand. Contacts ahead. 3 automated turrets guarding the main corridor, laser class rotating coverage. Crouched behind a fallen support beam and studied the situation. The corridor was 20 meters long and completely exposed. The 3 turrets sat on raised platforms, their barrels sweeping back and forth in overlapping patterns. There was no cover between their position and the far door. "We push through," one of them suggested. "Our armor can take a few hits." "Negative," replied. "Those are military-grade lasers, not training stuns. They will cut through plate in 3 seconds of sustained fire." "Then we need to take them out from here." The squad opened fire. Plasma bolts screamed down the corridor and splashed against the turret's shields. The turrets responded instantly, red beams lancing back toward the squad's position. One of them took a hit to the shoulder and dropped with a grunt. The tried to flank and was caught in a crossfire, their shields failing in a shower of sparks. "Fall back," ordered. The squad retreated around the corner, dragging their wounded, pressed herself against the wall, mind racing. She had been watching the turrets since the fight began. She had counted their rotation speeds. She had noted the slight delay between target acquisition and firing. "There is no way through," said. "The coverage is too complete. We need to find another route." "There is a way," said quietly. Everyone looked at her. The wounded laughed, a harsh sound filled with pain. The human wants to help with her stick. "The turrets have a pattern," continued, ignoring the mockery. "They rotate on a 6-second cycle, but there is a gap in the overlap when the left turret reaches its far position. It lasts maybe 1.5 seconds. Not enough time to cross the whole corridor, but enough to reach the first turret's platform." His eyes narrowed. "And then what? You cannot disable a laser turret with a wooden stick." "The turrets are automated. They track movement and heat signatures. If I can disrupt their targeting, even for a moment, you can advance while they recalibrate." Met's gaze without blinking. "I have been studying these systems for 3 weeks. Let me try." Silence stretched between them. Then Ren spoke up. "I saw her simulation scores. She survived alone for 47 minutes against combat drones. Maybe she knows something we do not." Looked at for a long moment, then they stepped aside. "You have one chance, human, do not waste it." Moved to the corner and watched the turrets complete 2 full cycles, confirming her count. 6 seconds. Left turret reaches far position. 1.5 second gap. She took a deep breath. Then she ran. The corridor exploded with laser fire. Sprinted straight down the center, stick held low, counting in her head. 1, 2. The left turret was turning away. 3. She dove forward, sliding across the dusty floor as a beam passed inches above her head. Her hand found a chunk of debris and she hurled it to her right, drawing the center turret's attention for a precious half-second. She reached the first turret's platform and swung her stick with all her strength. The wood caught in the turret's rotation mechanism, jamming between the gears. Metal screamed against metal, and the turret locked in place, its barrel pointing uselessly at the ceiling. Now shouted. Did not hesitate. The squad surged forward, firing as they ran. Was already moving toward the second turret, using the jammed first turret as cover. She spotted the access panel on its base. It opened with the end of her stick and drove the wood into the power coupling inside. Sparks flew, and the second turret went dark. The third turret tracked her, grabbed a handful of sand from the floor and threw it at the optical sensor. The turret's beam went wide, burning a line across the wall as its targeting system struggled to compensate. Its plasma bolt took it in the center, and it exploded in a ball of fire. Silence fell over the corridor, stood amid the smoking wreckage, stick still in her hand. The wood was scorched along one side, but it had held. Approached her slowly. How did you know that would work? Wiped dust from her face. I did not know. I just knew that sitting behind cover would not work. Sometimes you have to take the risk. Ren stared at her with something like wonder. The wounded said nothing, but their earlier mockery had vanished from their eyes. Far above the battlefield, in the command center aboard Axis Prime, Commander watched the footage on his screen. His 4 hands were pressed flat against the console, his bioluminescent skin flickering rapidly. For the first time since he had given the human her weapon, he did not look dismissive. He looked concerned. The attack came without warning. Was in her quarters when the station shook. The lights flickered, turned red, and a siren began to wail. She grabbed her stick and ran into the corridor where chaos had already taken hold. Cadets and officers rushed in every direction, shouting in a dozen languages. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, dividing the station into isolated sections. All personnel, Commander's voice boomed through the speakers. We are under attack. Hostile forces have breached the outer hull. All combat-ready units report to defensive positions. Push through the crowd toward the central hub. She needed information. She needed to understand what they were facing. A group of soldiers rushed past her, their plasma rifles humming with power. One of them stopped suddenly, staring at his weapon in confusion. It is dead, he said. The rifle will not fire. Looked around. Other soldiers were discovering the same thing. Plasma rifles flickered and went dark. Energy blades sputtered out. Shield generators whined and failed. Something was disabling all energy-based weapons across the station. Someone whispered, "It has to be." The name sent a chill through the corridor. Had read about in the archives. They were supposed to be extinct, wiped out 2 centuries ago in a war with the Coalition. Their technology had been legendary, including a weapon that could create localized fields where energy systems simply stopped working. Apparently, the reports of their extinction had been wrong. Found near the entrance to the central command hub, the cadet was staring at their useless plasma rifle, crystalline features tight with frustration. Ren stood nearby, scales pale with fear. Said when they saw her, "Your weapon still works." Held up her stick. Wood does not need a power cell. A distant explosion shook the floor. Through the window, could see shapes moving in the corridors beyond. Tall, angular figures in dark armor, carrying weapons that glowed with cold blue light. They had brought their own power sources, isolated from the dampening field. Their laser cannons still worked. "We need to reach the command center," said. "Commander will be coordinating the defense." "How?" Ren asked. "They have guns, we have nothing." Looked around the corridor. She saw broken support beams from the initial blast, cables hanging from damaged ceiling panels, ventilation shafts large enough for a person to crawl through, a fire suppression station with emergency axes behind glass. "We have everything," she said. "We just need to use it differently." She gathered the cadets around her, 5 of them in total, including Ren. She assigned each one a task. 2 would break open the fire station and arm themselves with axes. 1 would climb into the ventilation shaft and scout ahead, would use their natural strength to carry a broken support beam as a battering ram. "What about you?" asked. Twirled her stick. "I will make them chase me." They moved through the station like ghosts, led from the front, using her knowledge of the facility's layout to avoid the main corridors where patrols were heaviest. When they encountered a lone enemy soldier, she signaled for everyone to hide, then stepped out into the open and shouted. The turned, raising its laser cannon, was already running, leading it down a side corridor toward where waited with the support beam. The alien never saw the blow coming. It crumpled to the ground and grabbed its weapon before the body stopped twitching. "The cannon still works," she confirmed, checking the power indicator. "The dampening field does not affect isolated systems. We can use their own weapons against them." They collected 2 more cannons the same way, gave them to the cadets with the best aim, and kept her stick. She worked better with the weapon she knew. The command center was guarded by a heavy squad. 6 soldiers with laser cannons, positioned behind portable barriers. Commander and the surviving officers were trapped inside, unable to break out without weapons. Studied the enemy position from the shadows. They were disciplined, their fields of fire overlapping to prevent any direct approach. A frontal assault would be suicide. "There," she whispered, pointing upward. "The maintenance hatch above their position. If someone can get through there and drop behind them, they will break formation to respond. That is when we hit them from the front." "I will go," Ren offered. "I am the smallest." Shook her head. "You are fast, but you have never fought hand to hand." "I have." She handed her stick to. "Hold this. I will be back for it." She climbed into the ventilation shaft before anyone could argue. The metal was cold against her palms as she crawled through the darkness, following the path she had memorized from the station blueprints. Below her, she could hear the speaking in their harsh language. The maintenance hatch was directly above the squad leader. Positioned herself carefully, took a deep breath, and kicked the hatch open. She dropped onto the squad leader's shoulders, wrapping her arms around its neck. The alien was taller and stronger than her, but she had leverage and surprise. She twisted, sending them both crashing into the soldier beside them. Laser fire erupted wildly as the formation shattered. "Now," she screamed. Her team charged from the shadows, swung the support beam like a club, smashing against the wall. Ren fired one of the captured cannons, the beam punching through an enemy's armor, rolled across the floor, grabbed a fallen laser cannon, and aimed it at the weapon of the nearest soldier. She fired at the exact moment the pulled its trigger. Her beam hit the enemy's cannon barrel, redirecting its shot into the power core of another weapon. The explosion knocked 3 soldiers off their feet, was on them before they could recover, using the cannon as a club, striking at joints and weak points in their armor. When it was over, 6 lay on the ground and his team stood victorious. The command center doors opened, and Commander emerged with a squad of officers behind him. His 4 arms hung at his sides, and his bioluminescent skin pulsed with rapid light. He looked at. She was covered in dust and burns, her uniform torn, her hands shaking with exhaustion. But she was alive. They all were. "Cadet Morgan," he said, "where did you learn to fight like that?" Met his gaze. "Humans spent thousands of years fighting each other with nothing but sticks and stones before we ever dreamed of reaching the stars, Commander. We got very good at it." Stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to his officers. "Get me a status report on all sections, and someone give this cadet a proper command." Battle for Axis Prime lasted 6 more hours after the command center was secured. Led her small team through the station, teaching other cadets and officers how to fight without energy weapons. She showed them how to use the environment as a weapon, how to set traps with cables and debris, how to strike at the weak points in armor. By the time coalition reinforcements arrived, the invaders had been pushed back to their breach point. They retreated into space, leaving behind damaged ships and dozens of captured soldiers. The station had held. Slept for 14 hours straight. When she woke, Chris was sitting beside her bed in the medical bay, his face pale with worry. "You are an idiot," he said. "A complete and total idiot. You dropped through a ceiling onto alien soldiers with laser cannons. You fought hand-to-hand against enemies twice your size. You could have died 100 times." "But I did not." Chris laughed, though there were tears in his eyes. "No, you did not." He reached into his pocket and pulled out her stick. "Brought this for you, said you would want it back." Took the stick and examined it. The wood was scorched and scratched, but the grain still swirled in those delicate patterns. The balance was still perfect. It had survived everything she had put it through. "I need to fix it," she said. "Already working on it." Chris pulled out a small case. "I have been thinking about this since the attack. The wood is strong, but it needs support. I can reinforce it with a flexible metal core, something that will bend instead of break. The outside will still look the same, but it will be harder to damage." Smiled. "You would do that for a stick." "I would do it for you." 2 days later, stood before the full assembly in the station's great hall. The room was packed with officers, cadets, and dignitaries from across the coalition. News of the attack had spread quickly, and with it, stories of the human cadet who had fought laser cannons with primitive weapons. Commander stood on the raised platform, his 4 arms folded behind his back. His bioluminescent skin glowed steady and bright. "Cadet Morgan," he announced, "step forward." Walked through the crowd, her repaired stick in her hand. The wood gleamed under the lights, and she could feel the thin metal core that Chris had added, making it stronger than before. She stopped before the commander and stood at attention. "Before this assembly," continued, "I must confess something. When Cadet Morgan arrived at this academy, I gave her a wooden stick as her weapon. Many believed this was an insult, a way to mock humanity's short history among the stars." He paused, letting the words settle over the crowd. "It was not an insult, it was a test." Murmurs rippled through the hall, kept her face still, but inside her heart was racing. "Coalition intelligence has studied humanity for decades," explained. "Your species is young, your technology is limited. By every standard we use to measure military capability, you should be among the weakest members of our alliance." His eyes found. "But your history tells a different story. Humans have spent their entire existence at war with each other. You have fought with sticks and stones, with swords and spears, with fire and metal. You have adapted to every challenge, turned every disadvantage into strength. Your survival is not luck, it is skill." He reached behind himself and produced a medal. It was the Coalition's Crimson Merit, awarded for exceptional valor in combat. Only a handful of cadets had ever received one. "I gave Cadet Morgan a stick because I wanted to see if the reports were true. Most species would have demanded a better weapon. Most would have filed complaints, sought transfers, or simply given up." He placed the medal in his hand. Cadet Morgan turned a stick into a weapon that conquered laser cannons. She proved that humanity's greatest asset is not technology or strength. It is the refusal to accept that something is impossible simply because it is difficult. The hall erupted in applause. Felt the sound wash over her, strange and overwhelming. Beside her stood with the other cadets, their crystalline hands pressed together in the gesture of respect. Ren was smiling, scales bright with pride. "Cadet Morgan," said when the applause faded, "you are hereby promoted to squad leader. Do you wish to say anything to the assembly?" Looked out at the crowd, hundreds of faces from dozens of species, all watching her, waiting. She held up her stick. "On Earth," she said, "we have a saying, it is not about the weapon, it is about the warrior." She lowered the stick to her side. "Humans do not conquer because we have the best technology or the strongest bodies. We conquer because we refuse to quit, Because when you take away our guns, we pick up sticks. When you take away our sticks, we use our hands. When you take away our hands, we use our teeth. We do not stop. We do not surrender. We adapt, we learn, and we win." She turned to face Commander directly. "Thank you for the test, Commander. I hope I passed." Looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he placed all 4 hands over his chest and bowed his glowing head. It was a gesture of deep respect, rarely given to outsiders, never given to humans. Until now. The ceremony ended and walked through the station corridors toward her quarters. Cadets of every species stepped aside as she passed, nodding their heads in acknowledgement. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer a joke. Near the docking bay, she spotted a group of newly arrived human cadets receiving their assignments. They looked nervous, overwhelmed by the alien surroundings. A tall instructor stood before them, holding a bundle of objects. One of the new cadets stepped forward, a young man with dark hair and wide eyes. The instructor handed him something, and the young man stared at it in confusion. It was a wooden stick. Laughter rippled through the group of watching aliens. The young cadet's face reddened with embarrassment. Walked toward him. The laughter died as the crowd recognized her, the human who had fought the human with the crimson merit. She stopped in front of the young cadet and looked at the stick in his hands. "What is your name?" she asked. "Daniel," he said. "Daniel." Smiled. "That is a good weapon, Daniel, better than you know." She met his eyes and gave a small nod. "Make them remember it." She walked away, leaving Daniel standing with his stick, the seeds of understanding beginning to take root in his eyes. Behind her, the stars burned bright through the station windows. Somewhere out there, enemies were planning their next attack. Somewhere out there, new challenges waited. Morgan was ready for all of them.